Greetings. This is the Counter-Racist Evolving Engineer Program. The acronym for the program is Cree, C-R-E-E, and that is my handle. The date is January 21st, 2020. 2020 is an interesting year. January 21st is a significant date for me because it's the birth date of both my daughter and my father. And I just thought that would be a good segue into the subject matter here that is related to the image you're seeing on the screen. What you see there is variations of people who are not black, even if people who call themselves white would not accept them. But you see variations of them. You do see some black people there, but they're there to show the different variations because you can have, and I'll discuss it later. I mean, where it is that you got your non-black ancestry is, or the ancestry that has caused you to not look black and therefore not live a black life. And I'll go down punching on this with the best of them. I think I can. I think my concerns and my argument is solid, and I don't care how many credentials you throw at me. PhDs from MIT, professorships at various universities, the New School. I'll just name the names in the case of Dark Hamilton, and Duke in the case of Dr. William Darity. And what's so interesting is that their data, their research, their own studies validate my position and not their most latest. But this picture up on the screen can show you, I mean, it can come back, the ancestry that's giving you this phenotype, this look, where you don't look black, can be very recent, or it could be multi-generational. So there you see a family, and you see that they do engage in what's called, once you get to that point, they do have an affinity to one another. That's not random. I think if you've not heard of it, or you're new to this channel, or you just missed that particular video, I made reference to something called assortative mating. That's where people are getting together in a way that is not random. It is not, it's not the way that it would look if people weren't taking into account certain characteristics. And so when you see, if your position is that people who don't look black but who've been officially labeled as black have lived the same life as a black person, I have some data for you. But also, they wouldn't have persisted in the population, because if they were outnumbered 9-1, they would have vanished into the black population, and that's not what happened. That's not what happened as soon as they were free to do it. I don't think it's what has ever happened, and it's certainly, not happening now. Their numbers, their rate of population is increasing. Even if it were to stay the same, it would mean that they were doing something special to keep that phenotype at the same rate of growth. But let me tell you a personal story. People like stories. I like stories. I like telling stories. People who are close to me know that I like telling stories. And it really just gets down to this basic point. Do you want black Americans? Do you want the people who are black Americans? I mean, unambiguously, with the way that we look. And don't tell me there's not a correlation in the way that we behave. Do you, whoever you are, black, white, Asian, African, which is, most Africans are black, but not all. Whatever you are, Arab, Hispanic, do you want us to continue to exist? Serious question. And I do. If I were to come back, I'd miss us. I miss us already. We're something unique, something special. Notice that I'm not making a claim to superiority. But I am making a claim to something special that I think the world will miss if we're not here. If I were to come back and we were not here, in whatever form I came back in, I would miss us. I would miss the way we move, the way we file into church for a funeral. That's not necessarily a good way, but there's a way that we choreograph ourselves. I would miss the way that we express ourselves, what we put emphasis on, what we don't, what syllables we take off. I would miss our unique innovations in whatever we do. I would miss that flavor. And I know that it isn't something that I'm just saying because I happen to be that. And I've lived a lifetime that's long enough now. It's going on 60, to where I see it decreasing. I reside in San Diego, and this has been going on for about 20 years now, but it's a little better in Los Angeles, and I don't know what it's like in other parts of the country, but everything is getting homogenized. But I miss being able to say hello to a young black woman on the bus stop and hear a certain speech pattern, what we call patois, Black American patois. Other people call it AAVE, African American Vernacular English. But I haven't started my story. So the story is about how I know I'm not the only one. So, maybe 30 years ago, a little over. But I'll update it for you, because it's right now. At some point of the day, the man who I was living with, who was a white man, I don't know if we were at dinner or when it was, but he recounted to me a dream he'd had. And that was unusual because he didn't tell me his dreams, what he dreamt about when he slept. But it obviously had a residual effect on him. I could see it on his face. And he was ashen as he began to tell the story, and he just had to tell me the story. And there was no connection to anything else that happened. It wasn't like he was trying to get his way or anything. He just had to tell me about his dream. And he said that he was walking in a part of Los Angeles that's called Century City, and he was in Santa Monica as well. And he was just walking on the sidewalk. And after some period of time, a few minutes or something like that, less than an hour, he noticed that something was different and something was wrong. And then he realized what it was. He said he realized that he hadn't seen a single black person. And he just turned all the way around and started looking. And there were none to be found. And as he kept walking, he said that he kept looking at the faces of all the white people he'd encountered to see if they were as terrified, as astonished as he was. And he could see that they knew nothing of black people. And for him, that meant Black Americans. This is the 80s. And he said to me that what he was thinking in his dream was, my God, man, I remember the words. He said, my God, man, you'll never know anything. You'll never know anything about how they were. You'll never get to know what it was like to hear the Temptations. You'll never get to know what it was like to hear Diana Ross and the Supremes. You'll never know what it was like to hear Whitney Houston, or just to have a conversation with black people and to watch them walk. So that was in the 80s. And I have a list that I keep updating because it's part of what I hope to put in my writings that will be published. But it's a list of things that are in the general vocabulary now that nobody knows. I know because I'm old enough to know that nobody knows that we contributed. And then, not when I say contributed, I mean they were part of Black lexicon for like way past my father's day. And for a period of time, white people never said them. And I credit hip hop for bringing African American vernacular English, or, for people who are opposed to calling themselves African American, and I am somewhat. Excuse me. It's a strange thing to hear how many things people say they have that are just part of American English now that would have been thought of as stupid English. And I have a list of it. People say big ass to my big ass chain, my big ass list of things to do. People say all up in, or all up in my business, all up in here. I love me some so and so. I love me some, whatever. That was a Black thing that everybody says now. Or I remember when the Hulk Hogan started saying brother. I mean, it's at this point it's 100 terms long. There's a phrase in the Bible that's called, well, I don't know what the phrase is, but it talks about the chosen people being the salt of the earth. And so whatever other sort of classic works there may be references to that. But certainly it's apt to apply that to Tamericans. Tamericans are the original people on this landmass. And even if you just want to say the original Black Americans or foundational Black Americans, I want to talk about that. The difference between ADOS and FBA and all that feuding and what my position is on it. But it all starts with whether or not it's important to people that we remain here. And, certainly I understand that Black people's contributions are not limited to music and dance and entertainment. I'm the daughter of a scientist, and his friends, the parents of a lot of the children that I grew up with before we went our separate ways as different genders, which is a story I've told before. All of them were pretty much scientists and engineers, and I know the list. I've seen the list of inventions. And, of course, it's much longer than the actual list because there are plenty of things that we didn't get credit for because we were enslaved or various reasons. But whatever we do it differently. George Washington Carver's science was different. And I think that we are different than we are different. We have a different modality. We're different than Africans. But I don't think that it is because maybe it is a little bit, a tiny bit, but I'm talking about what I experienced as being an unambiguously Black person for, a good portion, if not most of my adult life. And as we hybridize, we lose that. It's not the same. And people can say that it is, but it's not the same. And people can say that there's no differences in talents, in dispositions, in temperament, that it's all, we're all the same on the inside. Come on, you don't really believe that. And that is against all the evidence. So that's the question. Now, if you can answer yes, you do, you would like to see us continue to exist. Even if we get transplanted somewhere, if you would like the continuation of that collective of people that are now called foundational Black Americans, which I actually prefer to ADOS now because I think it's more strategic, because you can be an American descendant of slavery and not be Black, even according to the criteria that Dr. Darity, the academic face of the ADOS movement, has set forth. I've been on record for a long time now, both on this platform and on Facebook, as being opposed to his criterion. He has a new one now that says, well, you had to have, the old ones are that you had to have identified as being black for 10 years. And you had to be able to document one enslaved ancestor. And both of those are problematic because he has said, as you well know by now, well, many of you do, that even Rachel Dolezal, if she could prove that she had one enslaved ancestor, she would qualify. I'll get into that in a minute, but it's like, suppose that there were FEMA funds being given for some sort of natural disaster. Okay? And it took out, say, all the houses in a particular area except for maybe one little nook or a few scattered houses. Well, and let's not call it a few. Let's call it, because it is that big, let's call it 10 to 20% of an area didn't experience it. Their houses didn't burn or get deluged for whatever reason. And now you have a limited amount of money, and you're going to disperse those funds to the people who need it. And maybe the fire or the flood, like in Katrina, was caused purposely, and you're going to compensate these people for the harm, even if it's intergenerational. Are you really going to, just because it's in the same area, are you really going to give out the funds to people whose houses were not destroyed? Just because they happen to be in that area, technically speaking, they are a resident of a certain parish or neighborhood. Are you going to do that? Does that make sense? And if you're going to give out, say, people who were harmed by redlining in a certain area during a certain period of time, but they've long since moved out of that neighborhood and they own mansions or homes of a great amount of wealth. And if they can prove that they had some lineage that was living in a redlined area, you're going to give out the funds to them too? To me, it doesn't make sense. And, people say make it make sense. But they usually are saying it sarcastically. I'm not saying it sarcastically. I feel very confident in my position, but I'm asking you, can you make that make sense to me? Because I'm talking about these people who Dr. Darity and Dr. Hamilton's own research, they have done research not only on skin color, they have made references to it being a proxy for other characteristics for an overall look, racial look. And Dr. Hamilton has actually done a study on the cost of looking black beyond just skin color. So I can't see any justification for their positions now that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's son, who had that one black grandparent, Doria Ragland, should qualify for reparations. Because what are you going to say? Well, what we want to do is we want to get them to the position that they would have been had they not experienced the harm done due to Jim Crow and redlining and all of that. Okay? To me, that's like saying, well, let's get you to the age you would have lived had you not been forced to eat gruel or sugar or whatever from age, I don't know, 3 to 7. Let's get you to whatever age, or let's say whatever height, either one. But let's suppose you're 97 years old. Now, are you going to say, well, had you not been given the gruel, you would have lived to be 150. Let's say you were 110 years old. Or let's just say you live the average lifespan, 80 something years old. Are you going to say, hey, you would have definitely lived to be longer? That's not the evidence economically. Once people get to there's a leveling out once you get to what is the median income for white folks. It is very unlikely. We know that because of immigrant statistics. It is very unlikely that you would have been very wealthy. We know that because most people, by definition, are not wealthy. And we're not talking about black people, just any people. So if there is data that shows that if you don't look black, the less black you look, the more you live a life of a white person, that the division really is black and non-black, and that's the life you've lived, and that's what the statistics say, why are we going to be compensating for that? And I would even say this. I would say that as dismal, as outrageous as the wealth gap income is in all the other indices, that what is really going on with black Americans is much worse. Because you have to understand that many of the people who are being included in that statistic are raising the bar. They're raising the median because they're actually not living a black life because they don't look black. If you were to take out that group of people who don't look black out of the official category and then retabulate the median wealth and median income and unemployment and so on, it would be significantly worse in my opinion. Which is one of the reasons that is a main recommendation for why we have to have a phenotypic test. Yes, it's tough. It's hard. It's like, trying to vote in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. It's just not done. There's opposition on all sides, but it's the correct thing to do. But if we don't do it, if we don't do that, we are going to continually to be marginalized, continue to not have resources, and our lifespans are going to shorten. Our infant mortality is going to increase. Our mortality for all causes is going to increase. And our birth rates are going to decrease. I'm not talking about Africa. I'm talking about here in the United States of America. And I think, that is definitely something that is headed towards extinction. And I don't think that anybody wants that. I meant to look it up, but there was some movie or it was a series on Netflix or Amazon where esteemed actor, he's supposed to be a genius, Robert Downey Jr., was talking to some other white person, and they were telling him to do something, and he laid down and he said, "Kiss my black ass." I mean, how we talk, the flavor of how we talk, what it means with the emphasis and the words that we choose have permeated this society, because we are the salt of the earth. If that's where I was going with in terms of the chosen people, we're that flavor. So we better get with a phenotypic test because we're getting bred out. And I could talk about the Pew study, but maybe that'll be for another time, maybe as a teaser. Because I looked at it maybe 15 years ago, or 2009, 2010, something like that. It's been about 10 years. And it said what you would expect, that, the overwhelming majority, like 90-something% of the white persons who took the implicit association test that shows subconscious bias, of course, have a bias against black people and a bias for white people. But I looked at it recently and it shocked the gourd out of me. Now, I'm not sure, Jordan Peterson, who's very popular and world famous psychologist and actually a philosopher, says that the test is not valid, in statistical terms. But when I looked at it recently, it said 25% of white people had either a slight, moderate, or strong preference for black people. And I would suppose that has something to do with Robert Downey Jr. and all kinds of white people using our phrases. You know, I love me some this, or a big ass this. I mean, so many ways that we do things. Okay. Now, I need to take care of a little business first. Some people may be listening to this because they want to know, well, the last time you were on, the last three broadcasts, last three videos you did, you were talking about calling Cynthia G on her plagiarism of your content, Cree, and that you wanted to get that stopped because it was too widespread and it was hurting the collective output by way of dampening morale of black people who are doing this work. And so yeah, I'm doing that. Understand that it is the statute of limitations for that is 3 years. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but you should not relax. It's happening. It's just I have several projects going at one time, but no, I know exactly what I'm doing, and I have since taken the time, not as much time as I'm going to, but to look at some of her other videos, and I found in that time period that I had taken the not the most recent hiatus, but the one before that. That during that time period, I see that she plagiarized even some more content. I mean, she really went to town on that. So yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm gonna fight the good fight. I may not win. I'll keep folks apprised. I might lose, but I might win. I might win. And even if I personally lose, it might be a win for us as a collective. For those of us who do this work, and therefore the black collective generally. I dated a guy. His name was Xavier Palmer. I shouldn't have been dating him. I talked about him earlier because I was like 16 and he was like 24, 25. And at any rate, we had gone to LA, which was about a 2-hour drive from where I lived. And he took me by his mom's house, his home in LA. And I had no idea at the time. We're talking about 70s. And there was a picture of his brother on the wall. And he told me that was his brother, and his name was Kurt Flood, and that he was very proud of his brother because even though his brother had lost a landmark lawsuit, you can look it up. I had never heard of anything such thing. I didn't hear. So this is what happened. So I've been through this too. I've been through this thing where history gets lost. We go through stages, when you're 10 years old, you never believe that you'll be 40, and when you're 18, you'll never believe you'll be 50 or 60. You'll never believe you'll be in a time period where you've lost track of what's happened in the epic right before you. But anyway, so there was this picture of this guy in a baseball uniform holding a bat, and that was his brother. I think it was his half-brother. His name was Kurt Flood. And he refused to be traded. He said, I'm not an animal. You can't trade me like that. We're not in chattel slavery anymore. The national, what do you call it for baseball? National League? I don't know. Anyway, he lost, but he set a precedent. And that precedent is responsible for free agency in every single professional sport today. So while what I'm doing, it may not be as big as that, even if I lose, I intend to prosecute this case on precedent so that we can set a standard for valuing other people's content. And I'll keep folks surprised as it goes. Okay, now, let me talk about this picture up here. So who this is this is supposed to be the royalty of the NBA, right? So to the far left is, what's his name? Doc Rivers. He's a coach in the NBA, I think of the LA Clippers. And then next, as we're moving from left to right, is his wife, who's obviously unambiguously white. Anymore, we can't say that, huh? With not just Rachel Dolezal, but something else I'm going to show you in this video. Then next to them, moving left to right, is their daughter, Callie Rivers. And she is holding an infant that obviously is her child, but the man standing next to her is Steph Curry's brother, Seth Curry. So, and then you see to the far right, moving left to right, you see Sonia Curry, who is a hybrid of some sort, but not directly. She didn't have a unambiguously white parent, but she's a multi-generational, what I would call a multi-generational mulatto. And then behind her is her unambiguously black husband. What is his name? Curry, Mark Curry, I think that's his name. But you see the different combinations. So you've got Sonia Curry, who's a multi-generational non-black person, mulatta. She married a black man. Then they had children. If you look at Steph Curry, you look at Seth Curry, you can see that it's almost like it was a white woman and a black man, because you can see Seth Curry, he's, and they have an affinity for each other. So Seth Curry, who is multiracial, married Callie Rivers, who's multiracial. And then they have a baby that's multiracial. This has been the pattern. They have always kept themselves apart. They have an affinity for each other. And I don't have an issue with that. I have no issue with people liking themselves and wanting to be around themselves. Everybody does, except for unambiguously black people. To some extent, everybody does. Now, I know that Asians have a high rate of intermarriage, but at the same time, Asians, the research is showing that, people don't really think there's that much difference between Asians. I don't. Between Asians and white folks. They're Eurasians. They're on the same land mass. There's, that people used to think that the sub-races, so the different types of white folks in Eastern Europe and Western Europe and so on, that those were different races. That's what Lothrop Stoddard said. He did a whole book on that, Racial Realities in Europe, where he was calling these different subtypes, because they do look different as different races. But as people mongrelized, as all the different white folks from different parts of Europe got in America, and they all started having sex and having babies with one another, the differences became, they didn't care, and they didn't have any problems doing that. There wasn't that kind of barrier. Same thing with Asians and Hispanics. There isn't a mental barrier there, and the evidence is that there isn't a mental barrier between these mulattoes, who look at the very least halfway in between. With the Cree tool, we say less than 68%, because that's what the science says in terms of similarity, physiological similarity. It's an algorithm that I wrote. There's the evidence is showing us that if you look less than 68% black, you're not going to live a black life, and there's not going to be people just holding off, trying to keep their distance from you, trying to keep you down. Okay. It's just like, so what happens is that as we introduce these hybrids, if you want to call them hybrids, mulattoes, what have you, as we introduce them and they get more resources, they will outpopulate us. Okay, the same way that is happening with what's called people of color. You can look it up yourself, 1950, 92% of the quote-unquote non-white population was black. In 1960, it was 95% in 1950 and 92% in 1960. But now, if you were to try to say, okay, it's not white and non-white, which it is the main difference, but it's not. It's not 95% black. It's not 90+% black. Black people are less than half of the total population of Asians and Hispanics, and so although some Hispanics consider themselves white, but I think you get my point. So in that same way of getting outpopulated, that can be what happens with this mulatto thing. If we let it go, if we continue to, if you want to make the important group people of color, you see what happens to black people, right? And if you want to make the group black, the black label, meaning anybody that has some known black ancestry, who says they identify as black, the same thing's going to happen as what happened with a group of people of color. You're going to see what's going to happen to actual black people, actually unambiguously, phenotypically black people. It's going to be the same thing that's happened vis-a-vis black people and Asians and Hispanics, or that POC, people of color thing. It's going to be the same thing. And so, and as I've said, just let any significant tangibles, as we call them now, right, happen, and it will be even worse, because you will have even more of the Mark Curries and the Doc Rivers. You'll have even more of those, because you'll have reparations. And so you'll even have more of them marrying non-black women. To some degree, it will be happening with black women and non-black men. And the issue of that is that we call it the issue, the offspring of these people will be given more resources. Now, what's the evidence of that? And they'll be able to outpopulate. Well, the evidence of that is that in, let me just start this carousel here so we can just see this panoply of what that looks like, of all these people. Just let that play in the background. These new black people. This is actually that was actually the term we talk about that now. I've heard that term on YouTube, new black people, that they're replacing us. But that was actually a term that was used, the new black people, in the black press in the early part of the 20th century. These were called the new black people, and some of these people are going to be pretty controversial, right? But these people that look like this. And what happened was, in 1850, see, the one-drop rule didn't start happening until the beginning of the 20th century. That's when it became law, right? Up until that point, you could have known black ancestry, but if you looked more white than black, it wasn't a big deal. You'd get included. And so that lets you know that the one-drop rule was not about keeping property, because it didn't even come into existence until well after the abolition of chattel slavery. But these are, the new black people. So between 1850, so in 1850, they may not have had names, but they would take numbers, right? And in the census, they would differentiate between mulattoes and black. They actually used the word black. They would differentiate between mulatto and black. So there's mulatto, black, and there was white. And so in 1850, one more thing. I mean, I could show you this, but I choose not to. You can look it up, and I'll be doing some writing on it, so you can read it then if you want. I think most people just want to listen. So at that time, they used the word Negro. And at that time, they used the word Negro the way we now use the word black, right? So Negro just meant, because of the one-drop, well, not because of the one-drop rule. Negro meant the collective of persons who were either mixed race, or what was called mulatto, or black. That's what Negro was. It was the collective of mulattoes and black people. That's what it meant then, which is interesting because that's what black people means to a lot of people today, right? Anybody with known black ancestry who identifies as black, etc., or identifies as being part black. And this is why Dr. Darity says now, well, if you have mixed ancestry, we won't force you to identify as black, just if you have one black grandparent, which would make Sir Archie, is that his name? No. Master Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor, the son of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, or the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, and the great-grandson of Queen Elizabeth. It would make that child, who is obviously white, it would make that child eligible for reparations, right? As if to say that he would have been even richer had he not had ancestry that was enslaved. Let's bring some let's bring some reason to this, people. And these are not like super isolated cases. So now back to the turn of the century. So in 1850, there were those designations. Now in 1850, 10% of that Negro classification were mulattoes. In other words, for every 9 phenotypically obviously black people, there was one person who was mulatto. 10%. Okay. But by 1910, it was double that number. They were 20% of the Negro classification. They doubled their rate. Do you understand the significance of that? They were populating at twice the rate of black people. Now, what are the factors for population growth? Well, the factors of population growth are fertility, obviously, life expectancy, how early are people dying? Back then, black people, my great-grandfather died at 48, and that wasn't that unusual, so you can imagine what it was like in the 1800s. So yeah, fertility, life expectancy, and some of that has to do with dying early, infant mortality, migration, and then another one that just has to say, well, what's the average, age of the people to begin with. So we know that, the population growth of, say, immigrants today is being driven both by high fertility, they're having lots of babies, and also they're migrating here. Well, why are they migrating here, and how are they having lots of babies? They wouldn't be doing that if they weren't getting the resources to support them. This is why when you go out on the street and you're on the highway and you see the work crews, the construction crews, you don't see any black people. I don't care where it is. I remember even being in North Carolina on a highway and seeing nothing but Mexicans on the work crews. Because they're being given the networks and they network with each other, but they are being cooperated with by the greater non-black structure because, again, the schism is black, non-black. It is not white, non-white. So this is what was happening with the mulattoes between the years 1850 and 1910. They were able to double their rate because they could support their families. They weren't dying at early ages because they were being given resources with easier lives. And this is why, so when Dr. Darity says that the criteria are that you can prove an enslaved ancestor and that you were living as a black person for 10 plus years before there was ever any mention, before you ever knew reparations were on the table. Well, let me tell you what some problems are that I haven't discussed on that second criterion. Because this is actually, he added a word. They've added a word now, living as a black person. Okay. So what does it mean to live as a black person? Because I can tell you when you're talking about public policy and legislation and law, words mean everything. So let's break it down. What does it mean to live as a black person? Now we can have a sermon about that, but let's just break it down how it will really happen when you're sitting in a room with people who have to get everything that they do and say and write and pass approved by non-black people. How does the law really work? Okay, what does it mean if Dr. Darity is sitting on that panel and people buy that, to be living as a black person? Well, it could simply mean that you've been living. You're a person, you're alive, you've been taking breath. That's living. As a black person. What does that mean, as a black person? Well, are you black? So we get back to what's the definition of a black person. Now, if a person says, I am black, I just didn't know it until 4 years ago or 3 years ago when I found out, and there's a man who claims to do that. He claims that that's exactly what happened. I didn't know. But I was black. If the definition of black is that, I have black ancestry, and I had an enslaved ancestor, but I mean, we're talking about the definition of black. If the definition of black is the one drop rule, or even one black grandparent, that's a problem, because one black grandparent, what's a black grandparent? How do you know that grandparent was black? How do you know the grandparent didn't look like one of these people here that you're looking on the screen? But they were just officially black. Now, if that's your situation, but you didn't find out about it, that you didn't find out about that you had a grandparent that looked like one of these people, or even an unambiguously black grandparent or ancestor, you were alive, you were black, and so you were living as a black person. That's a very reasonable interpretation. I mean, it's not a reasonable interpretation, but it is very likely the case to be made. Okay? And then there's also a principle in the law that says that you cannot cut off you cannot establish a statute of limitations, a cutoff period, saying that a person cannot bring a claim for injury or harm or what have you, a civil suit for whatever reason. You can't, that statute of limitations does not begin to toll. The clock does not begin to tick until the person should have reasonably known. So there was the case of, that's why everybody was up in arms about it. There was the case of this white woman who for years was getting paid less for doing the exact same job as white men. But say she didn't find out about it until years into it. And then when she found out about it, because she had no way of knowing, when she found out about it, she filed suit, and the Supreme Court at that time said, well, it's too late. But there is a general principle in the law that in just about every state, you can bring in every state, you can bring a cause of action as soon as you reasonably should have known. And there are going to be a whole lot of white people who've been living lives where they are cooperated with, where they get resources. They are not living like an unambiguously black person, who are going to be able to say, you cannot penalize me for not knowing, because we live in a system that discouraged people from claiming their black ancestry. That's not my fault. Had I known, I would have claimed black. How do you know I wouldn't have claimed black? You can't prove I wouldn't have. I'm here today saying I am. That's a principle in the law that runs across, and I can tell you there are going to be a whole lot of people on whatever panel who are going to rule in their favor. This is another problem we're going to have without a phenotypic test. Okay. I want to talk, finally, about this FBA versus ADOS. Actually, it's the ADOS squad, unfortunately. Click. Versus, Lord, should never be. Versus FBA, which is Foundational Black Americans. And if it's your first time listening, ADOS stands for American Descendants of Slavery. Versus the Foundational Black American clique that the I should give the names to. I'm assuming knowledge that I shouldn't be assuming. Okay, so ADOS is a hashtag and a term that was coined by Yvette Carnell and Antonio Moore. And then you have the foundational Black American term, which is coined by Tariq Nasheed, the producer of the Hidden Colors films and a whole bunch of other things, macking and whatnot. How to mac and whatnot, how to be a pimp. And so that's where it started, this feuding where people started insulting one another based on appearance and sound, and or whether or not people even chose to show their faces, which I choose not to. And so it's ADOS versus FBA, but not just FBA. There's a channel called The Black Authority. There's a channel called Professor Black Truth. I think there's, I don't know if the name of the channel is Jason Black, but all of them have been criticizing the ADOS people, particularly the most visible faces of it, the people who coined the terms, Antonio Moore and Yvette Carnell. And a good portion of it on both sides has been very disappointing, because it's just been making fun of how people look or sound, or it harkens back to some real old times. Your mama so black, you know. Your daddy so poor, your family's so poor, you know. It's very disappointing. It's not the kind of principled speaking and thinking we need to be engaging in. What if our ancestors had talked about how fat Fannie Lou Hamer was, or how soft Bayard Rustin was? Then this is an entirely different conversation about. I'm not having an LGBTQ conversation right here. What I'm talking about now is the relative importance to things at a given moment. Okay, and I also, while I don't think that the way that people look should be any part, if they're phenotypically black, but I'm saying, and even with that, it doesn't matter, because the logic is still the logic. But I'm talking about whether or not you find someone to be attractive or not attractive, or it should have no import, should have nothing to do with what we're talking about here in terms of trying to get some compensation for the harm that's been done to us by the racists in this part of the world. Okay? And but by the same token, if somebody chooses not to show their face, like I'm not sure who all doesn't, they're being called the babble whisperers, whatever. If somebody chooses not to show their face, it should have nothing to do with it either, because it should be the merit of what we're saying, you know. Now, I choose not to, and I'm glad that I didn't, because and in fact I have some videos. I had some videos up on my page that I locked, and I got very scared, because what happened is I had accidentally sent a voice text to an associate. I thought I had. And I had ended up sending it to somebody that I was doing business with. I had to do business with this person, and this person is Hispanic. And it was enough to give off enough clues to where if that person wanted to get on the internet and find my work, they probably could. So I had to immediately just scramble and try to not take it down, but at least lock it so it couldn't be found. It would have really hurt, and I'm not sure if it still is, hurt the business I'm doing, you know. So I'm not rich, and when I do make investments, you know, if it fails, I could end up on the street. And a lot of people have just made that judgment, and that's the judgment that I have made right now, right? So whether or not you like the way the person looks, or you don't like the fact that you can't see the way the person looks, that should have nothing to do with the merit of their argument. Now, I think I've already really talked about the shortcomings of the ADOS term, because you could be a descendant of slavery, but you've long since cast off any harm by virtue of that, because you don't look black, even if you don't look completely white. William Darity has shown that it's a sliding scale, and the big gaps are between, whether or not you look 68% or not. When I combine his work with other scholars, and I've already gone over that on other videos I'd encourage you to go look at. But yeah, if you haven't been experiencing that harm, then you don't need to be digging into our pot. It's going to be this, like I said, it's going to be the same thing as what happened with people of color. You're going to have people digging into our pot who should not be digging into our pot of compensation. And so, yeah, I think that ADOS is problematic as a term for that. I think foundational Black Americans is more strategic because this is racially specific. And you could be a foundational Black American and still, it's not likely, but you could still have most of your ancestors who were not in chattel slavery. You were not, quote unquote, free like a non-Black person, like a white person, because that's in that day. If you weren't white, that's what you were. You were Black, because we know as late as 1960 that was the case. But I found out that I have one great-great-grandfather who appears to have not been enslaved, because he appears on a census with we have a date of birth, and he was unambiguously Black, by the way. We know that because I've seen pictures of his son, my great-grandfather, and there's no traces of anything that wasn't Black in there. But that's just one out of my 16 great-great-grandparents, okay? But there may be people who had, most of their great-great-grandparents who were quote-unquote free persons of color, but they still suffered Jim Crow and redlining and everything else, mass incarceration, terrorism from lynching, and white people rioting and stealing, theft of land, and all that kind of thing. So you could be a foundational Black American and not be an American descendant of slavery. You could be an American descendant of slavery and not be a foundational Black American. In most cases, you're going to be both. But I feel like what I've heard I haven't really heard a substantive disagreement, because what I'm hearing is, it's about whether or not certain people are misguided in encouraging people to vote down ballot, whether or not certain people are really fronts for the Republican Party, whether or not certain people are really fronts for the extreme right wing, for Donald Trump. It doesn't get to the nugget of what the problem is, because it really doesn't matter, Democrat, Republican. We should be, I think that's how it started out, is everybody recognized that it should be substantive. It should be about, what kind of proposals or tangibles or agendas are you offering Black people to better our condition, regardless of party. So if that's the case, let's talk about that. And the substantive disagreement, I don't feel like anybody's getting to the substantive, the thing that needs to be criticized in the ADOS movement, which is the definition of what a Black person is. Who's going to be eligible for these reparations, or who's going to be eligible to get whatever kinds of compensations they're going to be given for the harm that has come to us by virtue of our phenotype, which is what all of the data says, right? And as time has, in the day that we're in now, it's like it slowed down. Even in W.E.B. Du Bois's day, he said that pretty much all of the mulattoes were multi-generational. The mixture in blood happened in the 1800s because the one drop rule kind of stopped. And so these people maintained their distance from phenotypically Black people and did very well. They did so well that they were able to double their rate of population. That's a big distance from the way the Black people live. Okay? I had like a picture of an Arnold Palmer drink that I wanted to show you. Let me take off this carousel. Malcolm X talked about coffee and cream, but an Arnold Palmer drink is just iced tea and lemonade. And so look at that drink, the way that it's arranged. You can see the iced tea at the top, and then you can see the mixture of the lemonade and the iced tea in the middle, and you see the lemonade at the bottom. Or you could swirl it around, but the statistics are showing that the big difference is not between the life outcomes. It's not between that bottom section, the white and the yellow. It is between the yellow and that very dark brown. That's what the data says. And we say we're database, but everybody wants to ignore that. And if we ignore that, my ex-husband's nightmare and my nightmare will come true. Different populations of black people have gone extinct all over the planet. Remember, at one point on this planet, everybody was black. There's some historian, Max and I are trying to find it because I lost my library. Some people know, some years back, so I lost a lot of books. But there's some historian that said, if you go back far enough in any civilization, not just the people, but the civilization, if you go back far enough, you're going to find that the founders were black people. But that's not the case anymore. So we know that this gradual marginalization and erasure and eventual extinction of black people all over the world has happened. It's happened in Brazil. Most of those people who call themselves black, there's tiny differences, collectively speaking, in their genetics and phenotype. I think that the people who identify as black on average have 62% European blood. They're identifying as black. And the people who identify as, those are Prieto. And the people who identify as Pardo or brown or mixed race are on average 68% European. And the people who identify as white or Bronco are, I think, something like 70 or 83%. Yeah, the black people there. Now, there are some unambiguously black people there, but they are at the absolute bottom. And this is what has happened historically all throughout the world, in Southeast Asia, in Khmer, in the Middle East, in India, in Europe. Heck, the Chinese and the Japanese have admitted that they're a fixed mulatto type. They just got rid of us. And this is the process. It's happening right here in the United States of America. And we go along with it because we're so inclusive. And so, Max and I are in the process of writing a white paper, and it'll be out in March, to talk about how to deal with that. And that historical error that we've been making. And it seems to be something that is innate. And so we have to figure out a way to compensate for this. So we're going to be writing a paper on that together, collaborating. I think that's about it. Look at my notes, make sure I covered it. I said this was going to be short. I have no idea how long I'm going. We'll find out when I close it and see if I want to edit it. I doubt it. I doubt that I will want to. Maybe there's a couple things I want to show. Oh yeah, I said I wanted to show you. I think you'll find this entertaining, except that it's dead serious. I'll let it speak for itself.
As far as Captain Carr, she loves to call me a Latin male. I'm a black male. Yes, I am. And I am non-Hispanic. I was born in this country. That's how I feel.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
So you classify yourself today as a black male?
Yes.
When you applied for the police department, did you classify yourself as a black male or a white male at the time?
I think I put white male. I don't know I know I put white male, but I don't know if I put Hispanic. No, I know. Listen, I know who I am, but it's also to make
male.
I'm sorry?
You put down Hispanic male, didn't you?
Okay. As a man, I stand by it.
When did you have this, coming with God moment that you were black? When did God tell you that?
Well, I learned that there's people in my family that are mixed and that are black.
I see.
Let's not talk about the degree of blackness.
Oh, no, you're blacker than me. That's obvious. And if you know anything about the one-drop rule, which started in the 20th century, which is what identifies and defines How you doing? What a black male is, or a Negro, you would know that if you have one drop of black in you, you are considered black. So you're probably black too, Joe.
Can we do a DNA?
Joe, you're probably black. Nobody sent me here, nor did the city manager. I am my own man.
That's right, and you're your own black man, I know.
Yes.
Yeah.
So now I'm being attacked.
Yeah.
Half of my family's Jewish. Probably didn't know that either.
Thank you. Your 5 minutes
Thank
has
you.
expired.
Mr. Ortiz claimed that he was a black. Now I hear Jewish black. I'm afraid maybe next month would be, black Jewish woman. I don't know.
Okay. Well, you saw it. And it may seem outrageous. I obviously saw that on Twitter. But that's real. And whereas the white man at the end acted like he was, outraged by it, when it really comes down to it, that is going to actually be taken seriously. We know that that's going to be taken seriously because if you've even got Dr. Darity, I'm sure under some sort of persuasion, we'll put it like that, to say that if Rachel Dolezal can prove that she had one enslaved ancestor, she should be eligible for reparations. You know that white people themselves or non-black people themselves, because we're on the two-race theory here, oh yeah, they're going to take that seriously. How can you hold me responsible for not claiming black when I didn't know, when I just found out? I was disadvantaged. And we know this is what happened with the Native Hawaiians. We know this is what happened with the Native Americans. Why would we believe that it's anything different? It's going to be anything different for us. And yet, when I saw the conversation going on in Twitter about this, they were really going on about how this particular cop was responsible for unjustifiable use of force, I think even an unjustifiable homicide, and the police department protected him, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, that's all valid conversation, but it doesn't get to the central point of lacking a definition of black person that is rooted in experience that matches data. Living as a black person, suffering everything that goes with that, the hardships that go with that, even if you succeed against the odds, is directly related to looking black. And you have to define what looking black is with practical precision. There's no way around that. There's no way around hurting your feelings if you have biracial children or kin or friends. There's no way around hurting their feelings. There's a pic we're saving for later of a woman who's got an ADOS flag. She claims maternal ancestry, and she looks exactly like Rachel Dolezal. The man who just got up there, that Hispanic white man who got up there and said he's a black man, they're going to be dead serious, just the way they were dead serious with the Asiatic natives, the Cherokees, the Osage, and everybody else. They're dead serious. And we know this because otherwise, why? This process of these mulattoes outpopulating us is the story of the planet, the peopling of the planet, what has happened to black people worldwide. Otherwise, we would still be the majority on this planet. When will we learn? I'm begging you. But mostly, it's because I just really, really think we're a special people. And I just take the position that we should still be here. I don't want us. Thing is, I know that even there are a lot of white people who don't want us gone. Now, they want to control us. They may want to call us, but they don't want us gone. And so, no, I don't want to be controlled. I don't want my people and my descendants and my kin's descendants to be controlled. No, we don't want that. But we don't. But an unintended consequence of you continuing to marginalize us, we see what's going to happen. The likelihood is that we will be extinct if we don't fight back. And the beginning of fighting back is just get a backbone and say, this is what a black person looks like. Doesn't mean we hate the rest of y'all. We don't have to hate you. But you're not a black person. You didn't live as a black person. which is the criterion that one of the criterion that Dr. Darity has set forth. Okay, that will conclude what I have to say tonight. Will I be back soon? I hope so. If you found this constructive, make sure that you hit the like button. Share it on your social media networks. That will be helpful. I don't think I've ever asked that before. And I was persuaded by looking at a lot of psychological literature and a lot of videos and so on that people are made uncomfortable. If they find what you're doing constructive and they don't have any way to say that, besides hitting that thumbs up, there are people who have actually asked me throughout the years, hey, how do I give you some money? Because I used to broadcast on Blog Talk Radio. And they just, maybe they would hit me up like, every 3 months, every month. And I lagged on it and I didn't do it because I was, but I have it up now. So you will find in the description my CashApp link and my PayPal link. So if you found this constructive, if you want to support what I do, if you want to make it easier for me to do it and be on here more often, that's one way you can do it, because I won't have to hustle as hard for other kinds of monies. We'll see how that goes. But they're there. The links are there. So, but if you can't donate anything, thank you for watching and listening. And one way that you can help, of course, is to share this on your social media networks, or send it to people's DMs and so on and get the views up. Okay, I want to thank you for listening tonight. And so I am now signing off for January 21st, 2020. This has been the Counter-Racist Evolving Engineer Program. That's it. Signing out.